Okay, today we're going to look at an article by MarionWest.com entitled "The New York Times 1619 Project Was a Long Time Coming." This is by a contributor to it, and you can see in the picture here the lady that's well known for trying to put forth the 1619 project. She's even got a little pin on her dress for doing it. She's even got a hair hat that matches the color of her dress and everything. So it's a great presentation. She's talking to Louis Gates over here on the right. Of course, if you know anything about Louis Gates, he realizes this is all just a hoax and a farce type of thing. Getting a little bit of a kiddie photo bomb there. Anyhow, this is really a failure, but it wants to show you a few things, and we'll share that with you if you've never seen the article or know what's going on. But quite a few of the things that are mentioned here you may have been witness to or have an understanding of already. Let's take a look at this. But Louis Gates, the guy right here, is famous for having a show to where he shows people Ancestry.com or something very much like it, to where he does an ancestry of people to show them what they found out about it. And a lot of these people, of course, don't really know their ancestry past their grandparents or whatever. And so whenever they can find a deeper connection than that, it reveals a lot of things to them, and it gets very emotional a lot of times and things like that. But also intermingled with a few of his videos, they show black people. And one of the famous ones was whenever they had Morgan Freeman and Chris Rock and a bunch of other black people who had tried to claim that they were part Indian. And that's how they got this or that from, and their grandma used to be, and so on. But in all of these cases that he shows, no, that's not really true. And then when he tried to explain to them how everything actually went down and so on, even Chris Rock tries to come out and say, well, it's better to actually act like maybe it had something to do with an Indian than it had to do with Caucasians somehow. And he mentioned the R word in there too, that YouTube doesn't like anybody saying in a video whatsoever. But it's funny, and Gates kind of checked him up on it, on how the fact is that when an R word with white people, but it's just supposed to be this great thing if it's anybody but Caucasians. You have this black and white freak out problem. But he really didn't go off like that on him, but he kind of showed that type of thing and mentioned a few cases where these people actually got the girl house next to them and all kinds of things, and that's how they got this ad mix from. And of course they tried to shun off that, but in reality all the black people that are in Africa are highly admixed by Caucasians, and that goes all the way back to Asillar Man, which I may have to go into here, but I have other videos on it where you can easily just take a look at it and the understanding of the truth of how everything actually had gone down. And it's quite revealing. But anyhow, there's this lady, and she's trying to explain to Gates that actually America didn't get started until black people were here somehow. And that's her whole idea on it in 1619, which was actually whenever a floundered ship had actually gotten taken by people that were coming to America. And instead of not doing that and taking them to South America where they were headed in the first place, and 92% of all the slaves that ever came to the Americas went to, with only something like 6% of them coming to North America, and another 2% being scattered a few places. So it's all thrown out of different ideas. And of course, the white people that are here are looked at as being in somehow a problem and caused it. And there's all this white guilt that's attempted to be put on this. But in reality, they were capturing and selling their own people off as unwanted for beads and alcohol or less. But it was a very lucrative trade because it was costing, even back then, whenever a dollar was worth so much, it cost a lot of money to buy certain black people. And certain black people were worth a whole lot more than others. I've described in other videos, and I'll waste a minute talking about it, but in the fact of whenever we got into this subject in 8th grade, I believe it was, and I was one of the only people who had enough nuts to actually ask Coach Jones a question about a picture that was being shown here that was a lithograph of an old slave thing, and it said on it that blacks were just $5, but something like $25 for an N word. And that seemed odd, and I asked him what the difference was, and he told me that Nigerians are the bigger black people. There's a bunch of differences all between them and everything. You've seen some that don't get 6 foot tall whatsoever. They're not all basketball players. In fact, in antiquity, nobody was a basketball player, which I find out later is for another reason. But in that fact, he said that, oh, that was just really that. The Nigerian people were this, that, and the other, and da-da-da, and they apparently were cost more and everything. So and I actually said, so the word that we've turned around into being the most derogative thing is actually just the Latin word for black, and that Nigerians have something to do with this, and that's just odd. And our JV quarterback was black at the time, with a big old fro, by the way, that he had to squish down to get inside his helmet. They even got him a bigger helmet than normal to help out with that, but we didn't think it was too good of an idea after a few games when he got hit real hard and got a concussion once and so on. So let's just get off that subject here. But that JV quarterback turned around and tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and looked at him like, oh, you're going to have a problem with this? And he gave me a big nod, just a nod, one of those nods and everything with a smile on his face, like, oh, wow. We just learned something here today that we probably weren't supposed to even talk about. Isn't that crazy? Well, what's crazy is the lack of information that gets talked about this in a modern day, because it's actually the age of pandering. And if you don't think that's in effect, you haven't been paying attention to the world lately, because it's all of a sudden gotten in your face. It's a daily occurrence, and with news and so on like that. But let's get into this article. It has the more interesting look and back at times. But more recently, the New York Times' Nicole Hannah-Jones has gone on an anti-racism crusade by coming up with the 1619 Project. I don't know if you've looked into this at all, but it's actually racist, and it's hilarious things get labeled as anti-racist if you'll racistly do something for one certain people and they really want it to happen. Oh, there's a lot of inklings of resegregation, but it's their idea, and all kinds of things that are coming out now, and it's just crazy. Let's continue and get into it, though. Is one allowed to lie in the name of anti-racism? There we got it situated. It appears so, even in cases whenever it's actually racist. But black people, if you haven't heard, pretend that they can't be racist because of their situation. So they could just say anything, and white people this, white people that, constantly. And you may have seen this. And that's all okay. Whenever this happens, anybody that makes comments about it, could you imagine just flipping the races and having the same thing said, and the way people would try to lose their mind over it? Oh, there's your indication, as if you didn't have one before. Anyhow, so the Post has said that, and it's MarionWest.com, 2020, 420, hey, the New York Times 1619 Project was a long time coming, but whenever you look over it, it's actually called 1619 Project, but it's still a giant lie. Uh-oh. So is one allowed to lie in the name of anti-racism or be racist, saying that it's anti-racism somehow? Well, it appears so, but if you don't cry watching the television version of Alex Haley's Roots, your heart must be made of stone, she says, or he says. However, unfortunately, Haley invented many points in his book that never ever happened. And even though he tried to pass his narrative off as reliable and a thoroughly researched history, It's actually not true. I've done a separate video about this because somebody mouthed off on and stated a few words out or phrases out of the movie at me and on my videos whenever these Afrocentrics found my site and I wasn't willing to lie for them. And they actually said that it was racist if I didn't lie and agree with them, which was crazy. And after a period of time, I decided to make a few movies to debunk what they said. And then they gave me a list, believe it or not, that I went through, and they kept adding to, like, if this other stuff isn't in effect, then none of these other things are even a question. But yet they were whole hog about how it was real and things like that. And I did a recent video about cargo cults too that explains why they have these attitudes and their viewpoints and things like that. And it's really quite interesting. It's a professionally done thing. Well, Robert Sepper's part of it, but he shows a video that was done from the 70s and like a BBC type commentary stuff and talking to people and showing them and everything else. And because it's an islander that they had gotten actually exposed to humans for the first time other than themselves at World War II, whenever people were making cargo shipments back and forth, and they derived this idea that this is all neat stuff that must have been from their people and that somehow the white devil had stole it from them, or there were a crafty people that somehow was stealing these giant flying birds and machines and airplanes basically, and all these things that they had must have somehow come from their ancestors somehow, and not these incredibly advanced Caucasian people. But Haley actually got filed against him in court and won against the fact that he had actually stolen most of what, or the backbone even, of the idea of the show of Roots from a fantasy book that was written not indicating something as real as ever happened by a white man. And he had to pay, watch out for this word, he had to pay reparations and a large amount of money to it in a sport, not just having this book that came out that kind of got popular and somebody wanted to make a pandering movie about. If you look into who that was, there's other issues there, but in doing so, he got made a lot of money, and all of a sudden this guy's like, you know, that's my story, that's my book right here that predates him, that he read, that he stole all the stuff from, including dates and names and places and everything else. But blacks still believe that that's kind of more like it happened than all of real history shows. When Alex Haley got caught at this, he said, well, what he was doing was trying to make a myth that black people could live by, as if they couldn't live by the reality of the way this all happened, and that he knew it. It's crazy. More recently, the New York Times' Nicole Hannah-Jones has gone on an anti-racism crusade by coming up with the 1619 Project. Whether it's that year or 1776 was the real founding of the United States, she feels, is a matter of debate. But what is clearly false is the American Revolution was chiefly about protecting slavery. This is what she indicates, and of course it's always going to be all about black people, to the point that we need to change our founding date to 1619 instead of 1776, because that's when black people showed up. And it's like, well, we got a 1492 thing here, but I mean, we got the Vikings from way back when, and there are all these other things, but let's just stick on course here for a moment. It would never be about you whenever it was Caucasians and everything in the first place, and your position shows that it can't be, regardless of if you've been freed or whatever else here. Strangely, over on the right-hand side is an article about Abraham Lincoln, and you know, a lot of things have been said about it, of course, and about how the Civil War was all about this or that or the other thing, but what he did say whenever he was having speeches, after it is that he freed the black people, but they were all going to have to go back because there was far too much of a difference. They were going to be a great burden on America trying to get itself going, and that's not a great idea for anyone. And I think you can easily see it. And apparently they did, but they killed that man. And so a different direction was taken, although Monrovia and Liberia were actually already made for it. But those people are now the cannibal warlords of Liberia. The first thing they did when they got back was enslave the locals and all kinds of other things if you look into it. So that's kind of real embarrassing. It quietly retracted making this false historical claim and tried to get it away. Yet Hannah Jones defiantly keeps pushing this agenda, truth be damned. And so we have that type of problem. I don't know, recently I made another debunk on this proud family idea and how slaves supposedly built this country whenever they didn't even know what really civilization was. So how are they going to build something and all of these buildings, architectures, roads, everything else that they never had or experienced to or knew what it was about somehow? But it's hilarious, and it's actually a black woman refuting the idea. They're like, come on, man. And so I thought that helped a little bit better on getting blacks to understand, just like whenever we show the thing about cargo cults. Hey, here's something that happened over here. This sounds real familiar. And it shows that and the idea of Egypt and things like that and so on, which we'll get into here later if I can ever get going. So they retracted this back, but it's weird. It's like blacks, whenever they hear something, they're gonna disweigh science, archaeology, and everything that's been shown, genetics or whatever, and try to point out something that somebody else said thousands of years ago sometimes, and make an assumption off of that they're even talking about West Sub-Saharan somehow, and that's not the effect at all. In fact, just to mention it here without going on, like I said I was trying to do, they always try to mention things and point out. When you ask them who, then they go, well, the Ethiopians or the people in the Horn of Africa now are Nilotics. And it's like, you didn't even know those people existed, and you're actually not related, and genetics shows it and so on. So why do you keep pointing at them and saying we? But blacks in America have been trained to try to have just a simplistic mind idea on this whole thing, that if they're not light as a sheet of paper, then it all has to do with black people somehow. And that's crazily strange. That there couldn't be anybody else, that everything is just all black and white and so on. And again, I want you to look at that lady that's right there and look at the amount of admix that she has, and you can easily see it, and how light her skin is. And I don't know if some of that's from bleaching or whatever or not, but she's even lighter than Gates here, just a touch. But let's continue here. So she keeps pushing this agenda, and of course this is what happens a lot of times with blacks whenever it's totally refuted and has no truth in it whatsoever, and they just keep saying it. And some otherbody else will take on and go, I heard about this, like it's brand new and hasn't been totally debunked. Even old things that people who said, like Diop and people like this, and tried to come out and say blacks were the Egyptians and all this different stuff, that's been totally debunked, and they just try to bring it up. A few of those instances will be brought up during this if I can ever get going again, so let's go. This is in a way a new wine in old wineskins. Well, let's get to where, there we go. New wine in old wineskins. This is a regrettable long history of spurious historical claims, all with the alleged purpose of countering racism. By being racist, does that make any sense? Well, if racism is so bad, why do you embrace it so bad? Afrocentricism is surely the most pathetic case. If you are a black school child and you are constantly told that your ancestors have always been brute savages or primitives, your self-esteem will likely suffer somehow. Now, let me interject here, that only is really in effect because you're around the spacemen, heralds of civilization that basically created everything around you. So that extreme contrast versus what they try to say about themselves is really strange, and anybody with any decent mind or breathing in and out of oxygen would be like, oh. And so they, by their own hands, make themselves a clown on the world stage. And that's why people like Chief X and so on that used to be in this cult and actually realized after people probably refuting him and giving him information more enough to where he discerned that, oh man, this is all just jealous lies and so on. And now he's actually trying to help blacks out, but they just don't want to hear that. They like their little fantasy lies much better, and that's getting past pathetic. And in fact, he says out here, Afrocentricism is surely the most pathetic case of this, where you're trying to counter racism by something like that. But your self-esteem might suffer if you're going through all of this and then you're trying to compare yourself or feel like you're competing somehow with Caucasians whenever it's just really can't even be attempted. Then when you find out that in fact Africa had some more important civilizational achievements, such as say Great Zimbabwe, but then you're later told that the people who built it actually belonged to the white race, as the so-called Hermetic hypothesis claimed, the insult seems even greater somehow. In the history of Western education, this has been all too common. In fact, in the history of the world that we actually have, you can see that. Even blacks in America try to claim Great Zimbabwe, and it's like, did you know Great Zimbabwe even existed? Well, the locals that are there that you're not really related to tell that anybody that comes by that they didn't build this, that it was some white people that looked like this cameraman over here, and that they built it, and that they were called the Maiti, and they did this, that, and the other, and da-da-da. But they don't want to hear that. They already had this lie all pent up about how somehow Western sub-Saharans could even claim that, even though they didn't know it existed till the white man showed them. And when they did, they go, oh, we did that. But funny, the Hamitic hypothesis, if you look it up, where they try to interject themselves in the Bible somehow, Ham was never a black person. In fact, the comings from that, the cities they say that he's associated with and so on have to do with Egypt and so on, and they want to inject it all in C. And it's like, well, you didn't know any of that existed and are not involved. Genetics has proven it here lately, so that's just dismissed totally. And everybody thinks that, well, that's the end of it, and we'll quit hearing that, and we can finally get on with trying to get on with the reality of the world. But no, it's dragged down again and again and again. And he'll talk about this a little bit through this idea. But Hamitic languages is division of the Caucasian race. All of Noah's kids were, of course, Caucasians and come from there. And they had the same genetics. So strangely, and I may go into it after I show this here, if I can ever get through it, is that there were blue-eyed people in the earliest Egyptians. You can simply look up blue-eyed Egyptians and it's there. And they show themselves. And these crystal blue eyes, and it's incredible. And scribes and nobility and stuff, everything too. But you also see it in the Sumerians, and of course you know about it being up north to Japheth. It was supposed to be Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and of course those are all Caucasians. In a more modern time, people try to say, well, that's how Arabs and this, that, and the other happened, and it's like, no, that isn't quite how that happened either. And then you can look at genetics and go, see? It's crazy. But yet, it's reality. And we only think of it being crazy is because we've only recently had a bunch of lies and twisted truths kind of shoved upon us so we could try to believe in something that isn't really the exact way that it happened. And even the whole story about slavery that you're taught and the way you're taught in school to think about it, whether you're white or black, you end up with a lie in both cases. And then blacks take it off in left field But then if you read about it, it's way off in right field up in the cheap seats and totally, totally not what blacks try to turn it into. And the blame and the reparations, and well, who captured and sold you then? Oh, that was your own people. You're going to talk to them about it? Oh no, I'm trying to prey upon white people with white guilt. It gets past disgusting, and then it gets worse. And in the age of pandering, you can see it happening on a pretty much daily basis, even if you're trying not to. So this has been all too common, as he says, but however, instead of pushing back with real historical information so as to counter racist narratives, some pseudo-historians have come up with wild, absurd theories that amount to a simple turning of the tables. Or if you ever thought this was all about white superiority and so on, this is the exact opposite and extremely racist in the age where we're all trying to recognize it and get away from it. The problem ensues out of that is now everything has been called racist, from water because they're not known from swimming, to math because they're not good at it, to everything that has to do with anything that has to do with actual technology and science and everything else. They've tried to dismiss and say that the white man made it all up, and then that's hilariously self-exposing when you show that a minute ago you were trying to say that you did everything and you and we did this and we did that, and then you turn around and you go, oh, the white man made it all up. Then the next lie that comes out their mouth is that they weren't who they were, West Sub-Saharan pre-Neolithic people, but they were actually the Caucasian Egyptians, and everybody stole from them, so all of a sudden they just lost all technology somehow and went ignorant again off of it. And then that's self-exposing too. You need to quit doing that, but they can't quit. They've actually in a weird way been trained to lie about everything, and a lot of people say, no, that's them. Given a chance, given any indication whatsoever of trying to embrace reality, they would rather embrace lies and then push them. And if they looked into it at all whatsoever, a scant look, just a glance, they realize, well, nobody's going to agree with this because that's all a lie. But they don't seem to care about that. So you have a people that are actually trying to counter it with racism, causing it by their own hands, and they realize what the world thinks, and they've come up with this whole brand new my truth type of idea, which everybody that's cognitive and breathing in oxygen realizes that there's only one truth, and therefore anybody that would say something like that should be put an asterisk next to it to go like, watch this crazy stuff that comes out their mouth. So they've come up with these wild, absurd theories that begin the simple turning of the tables. This is what anthropocentrism is all about, in fact. The movement began with a 1954 book by one obscure Guyanese author named George James with the title Stolen Legacy. James took for granted that the Egyptians were black somehow. You see, his logic that fails is that basically it was in Africa, therefore it must have been Africans, and because I hear us called Africans, that means we were the people that were involved, not a people that didn't even know Egypt existed. But he just took that for granted and went on. And that claim in and of itself was, of course, very questionable during the time, during everything that we know, but everything has shown us since then, along with new genetic studies that are starting to be done, that, oh wow. And I might be able to show that to you here in just a minute too. Let me get on with it though. But remember this one. And so James did not care to elaborate on that. It was just a given to him somehow. And this is that cargo cult thing, which I wish you'll watch my video about it. Go to my channel. It's one of the last ones I did right before this one. But just might look up cargo cult. You'll see a few different ones on them. And the most recent one is the one I'm talking about, because it does make a connection mentally and everything along with this and the way this goes on. So his greater claim was that the Greeks stole philosophy from the Egyptians, which is not true at all. In fact, philosophy is heralded out of the Greeks, where they started questioning things and came up with logic, which I learned about at a young age. My brother going to college, I go, "What you learning?" I came in one night and everything, talked to him, and he goes, "Logic," and I go, "Oh, really?" So I got a little bit of a logical mind here. What goes on with it? So he showed me the basics of it and everything, and I go, "Oh, I get the total idea." And he goes, "Well, there's also fallacies of logic, where you could turn around and say something like this, and da 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 and da da da, and it comes out to be, well, see, the A plus B doesn't equal C." And I go, "Oh, so like I'm a boy, I'm 16, therefore all boys are 16." Doesn't make any sense at all, but it follows the logical thread, so you have to go and put it against. Oh, that's amazing. Then you take a college course on it and you're like, wow. Anyhow, um, so, but this is what Afrocentrism is all about, is just trying to be as racist as they can. Almost appears that way, doesn't it, if you get into it at all, and claim everything but themselves. And they've gotten to the point where they believe in this. So you can imagine how far out in left field some of them are, but then there's a lot that aren't whatsoever. And so there's this big controversy there, but then also the idea that if you truly are woke, you'll never embracing any of this BS, and you know. But the other black people that know this is all BS won't call it out, won't question it at all somehow. They'd be too embarrassed to do so. So it just goes on and on and on like a silly, stupid game that ends up causing a burden upon themselves and a lack of advancement and all kinds of things else. But believe it or not, they believe to lie about this thing is try to give them this fake advancement, and they really want to go with that because they see the reality of what they're up against. Regardless, in his strange story, this George James guy said that Aristotle looted Alexandria's library and claimed for the Greeks all the knowledge that had originally been Egyptian. Da, da, da. And you'll hear black people still reciting this again as if it has some truth. And so since the Egyptians were black, the real origin of Western civilization is black, and whites were just culture vultures. Strange thing about that is Aristotle predates the idea that there even was a library of Alexandria, and the man doesn't know what he's even talking about or going on with. I've made videos about the library of Alexandria and things like that, but let's just stay on track here if I can. I want to try to. The left's current obsession with cultural appropriation largely derives from these people who believe in this, such as James. And this narrative's white steal cultural products from dark-skinned people, not unlike the claims made in Stolen Legacy, are in that cargo cult that I ask you again to take a look at and understand, and you can see it from a philosophical and mental point of view, and understand how a primitive people would come out of that doing it. But you would think that would be long gone because of them being around such an advanced people so long, but you still have this go on. In fact, it's going on to another level, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so it's not made any different than the claims that are made in Stolen Legacy, and of course the whole concept of Stolen Legacy has something to do with that cargo cult too. Yet James' theories don't hold any water at all, and Alexandria's library was built long after Aristotle's death, and yes, Egyptians had some influence on Greek art and probably even their religion, but this was no theft. It was just the natural diffusion flow of any cultural encounters, and of course Caucasians had variations on themes on their religions. I've spent a lot of videos talking about this and how the pagan things, it's like, here you see these stories, those stories. It's known by scholars that a lot of the stories come out of the Sumerians. It even actually in your Bible says it because Abraham came from Ur, and it kind of puts the whole idea in there where this comes from. But then you look back at everything else and it didn't happen exactly like that. Let's not go deep into that though, but This was no theft, it was just the natural diffusion and flow of cultural encounters. Even so, when it comes to philosophy, there's little, if any, trace of Egyptian influence among the Greeks on this idea whatsoever. What's strange is that some of this is true, and Dionysus has connections to the ideas of the ancient Osiris, and all this has connections to that. And then some of these people are actually Apollo, and that has to do with Dumuzi or Tammuz in your Bible, and so on too. And so it's actually a conflagration of paganistic type things thrown into together in a different way. But James here, whenever he did this, they say, opened a can of worms. There we go. James opened a can of words. Another pseudo-historian, Cheek Anta Diop, which is still being touted by blacks to this day, even though everything's been debunked in the ground, and then all the other little fibrated lies off of that have all been debunked in the ground, and then they still come on like they're brand new again, reciting something that was debunked before the man ever got out the door. But he published in 1955 a book known Nations, Nigres et Culture. That's French. And not a Bantu linguistics or anything, but unlike James, Diop tried to prove at greater length that the ancient Egyptians were black. He has a famous thing where he's talking to people and he goes, yes, Egypt was a black man. And it's weird to hear statements come out of their mouths like that. It's like, oh, so one black man was in Egypt once? Because you're not plural. I didn't just, anyhow. He claimed that the language of ancient Egyptians was related to sub-Saharan languages, and this is simply not the case, and actually been totally debunked, every single form of linguistics whatsoever. But I've had blacks claim this too, because they read Diop's Handbook of Lies, and they spit them out like they're brand new, showing you that they really want to believe in this cargo cult mentality type of thing and not the reality of the world. And like Alex Haley we started with and stuff, it's a myth for them to live by because they couldn't stand the reality of what really actually happened. Comparing that to the Caucasian spaceman, I can't lie. Well, you can, you'll just keep making yourself look like a clown. So, he also claimed that Egypt formed a cultural whole with Nubia somehow, and Ethiopia as disputably black nations, if you will. But of course, in my other videos, I show you how Nubians were domesticated and they used to be called troglodytes. They weren't even allowed in Egypt and so on. Or small amounts were Medjay and so on like that, but that doesn't suddenly make it, because you yourself can easily look at it and say that's a Nubian. Just like sub-Saharan Africans in America, we're known as African Americans. People see that, but they want to try to take that away. It's funny, names that they really love in a short amount of time due to their lies and narratives become something they don't want to accept whatsoever. Even the N-word itself, oh, it's a secret word that no one can use except for themselves, which is strange. If you thought it was so bad, why would you go around constantly, and especially in your rap music and so on, calling each other that? Are we missing something? So again, all of this is dubious, and of course been debunked all the way. And of course there were Nubian immigrants at times in Egypt, but they would easily be assimilated and thus become Egyptians, but they would never be an Egyptian. That's a Nubian, and there's a total difference between that. Easy way to say it is red ochre males and pale females is what you see in the Egyptians. You also see that in the Greeks. We're not confused about any of these people. Like Levantines had this too, the Mitanni had this, the Etruscans way over there by Italy had this effect of red ochre males and pale females. The Phoenicians, Sumer, Persia, the Mitanni of ancient Anatolia, all kinds of different people had this effect going on, but somehow some people want to be confused about this one. And the strange thing again we have to mention is that far west sub-Saharan Africans that didn't even know Egypt existed are the ones trying to claim we, but then you go, show me some of this, and then they try to point over there and say them and then say we, and then say them, whenever they didn't even know any of this existed. And they aren't related to anybody that did, much less the Egyptians, than even Nubians themselves, or Khoisan, or the Pygmies, or anybody else. No. It's why science has turned around and said it's got the most genetic diversity, and then they turned around and we got the most genetic diversity, and it goes, not really, you're really locked in this one thing, and then you've got admix. We might look into that a little bit later. Let's continue here. So this also happened later, just as it did in Rome or Greece, but their numbers were never very high, and there may be black-looking people in Egypt today, but overall Egyptians as a whole resemble far more the peoples of North Africa, and this person says, i.e. neither black or white. The strange thing about that is people try to look at the demographics that's there today and don't realize that at the time in question we're talking about, none of those demographics were in play. And a lot of the people that are in the area now, due to Muslim conflicts and so on and everything else throughout history, we end up having some admix in these people that aren't in effect. In fact, one of the things that I'll try to show you here in a little bit is that they clearly say that. And they also mention the fact that what's different between the modern Egyptians and the old ones is that they only have a 1% connection to the old ones. And a lot of the reason why is because of sub-Saharan admix, because of the slave trade. Oh man, that just ruins the whole Afrocentric idea of we and that you were even there or anything. But after that comes out, what do you hear? Do you hear something different all of a sudden? No, it just keeps getting worse. In fact, I don't know if you've heard about the latest movie where they're trying to claim Cleopatra, a Macedonian Greek, might have possibly been, wait for it, a West Sub-Saharan Bantu Congoid primitive. What? Oh yeah, it's coming out by Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, who's kind of infamous for her racist beliefs and things that she said, a lot of which, one that sticks to mind is when she kept messing with her hair and turning it blonde, and crazy in an interview whenever she's sitting there in a blonde hair hat. She says the one people she can't stand is blonde white ladies. And she's sitting there wearing a blonde fake hair hat. And then she came out without hair whatsoever. Oh, I lost my hair, I'm bald. And of course, Chris Rock made a joke, and Will Smith came up and just really ruined the Oscars and stuff by coming on and doing this slap over thing and screaming at him and stuff from the stands. Currently, he's trying to sue him because he doesn't like what he said is his jokes. Suing a comedian. It's hilariously sad. So in the strange tellings of Afrocentrics, ancient Egyptians were all black, and the current racial makeup only came to be with Arab invasions. But again, this is very inaccurate claim. The Arab invaders were not really too numerous, and it can be safely argued that the physical appearance of Egyptians today did not differ much from that of pharaonic times. Well, the one thing is that there's a dark and a more olive skin type of thing that whenever you look into the genetics of everybody they've shown, you can just look up mummy DNA and they will show you stuff that they figured out with genetics. And oh man, it's just devastating again who they are. We'll show you the papers where they actually mention that the closest people related to the ancient Egyptians are actually Europeans and ancient Anatolians, not Turkish people that are there today. So they make that clear descriptions on it, but it comes out with that exact idea. And then, of course, this is the best genetics that we have to this day, and it won't suddenly change and freak out in any way. It's actually not worth doubling down on a lie or trying to say it. But of course, I've had a few black people say so, and Egyptologist 7 made one that's funny whenever they came out with this genetics they found in Abersermelech, and you see this black guy going, they did say, I can't figure it out, and she breaks in and she's like, boom. Anyhow, so in the strange telling of Afrocentrics, ancient Egyptians were all black, and the Russian came up much later, and that somehow that that they got their stuff stolen from them, and this is a cargo cult thing again. So I'm showing you that with the cargo cult movie, even though it's talking about islanders and during World War II, which is really quite recent, it still goes on. And if you believe so, just like in the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy, there's still kind of a cargo cult going on in the non-colonized parts. But of course, colonizer is supposed to be bad whenever they really want everything that it goes with. They just don't like the embarrassment of it all. It's strange. Here's a new one for you, and this is of course from 2020, so way before the current idea of trying to make Cleopatra black and then call it a documentary. Yeah, that's a real problem. Let's get into it. For some reason in this grand Afrocentric myth, the idea of Cleopatra the seventh is a big trophy. Holloway portrays her as a blue-eyed Jesus when in fact he was probably brown-skinned. Well, that's not true if you look at the demographic of ancient times. It's hilarious whenever they say, well, there's these people there living now, they got an admix to them and so on. And of course that was never in effect back in the time, but I'm going to tell you that Jesus probably looked like this rather than somebody that doesn't. We'll actually see an article about that and so on too coming up here in a little bit. And I hope this doesn't go to a part 2, but if it does, it'll be in your top left-hand corner and we'll go to it. So you might think that the real Cleopatra did not really look like Elizabeth Taylor, and in fact, she was black. That is what Afrocentrics try to claim. I've even had one on my site tell me that they like that name and therefore in the current new idea where they're trying to steal and or try to make believe blacks somehow were there and that West Sub-Saharans even knew that Egypt existed, even at the time of Cleopatra, they show a clip in there and it's really quite self-exposing. There's an older black lady, who's quite admixed and quite light, but at the time she goes, my mama told me, I don't care what science or anything tells you, Cleopatra was black. Well, if you'd ever get into it, you find out she's a Macedonian Greece from after Alexander the Great came through and so on, and was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty towards the end of that. And of course, Mark Antony and all the things like that, which is really almost a Romeo and Juliet ending here with the way they killed each other and so on. And a lot of people think that it has to do with it, but with Shakespeare's concept. But she had, it's funny, even though you might try to claim Egypt was once black, they're so confused about it, they're willing to try to go for Cleopatra, a Greek, who was in Europe, Greece, might have somehow been black. And the excuse that's said in here is, well, we're not really so sure. And it's like, oh no, you apparently don't read archaeology or anything either. They know the lineages and who's related to who and everything. It's one of the parts that we know most about, and it's been romanticized so much. But funny, I did a recent video showing that whenever Soy Keita, who a lot of black people will try to take some of his Afrocentric viewpoints and put them out as if that's reality, actually at a conference where he was talking about all of this and genetics and the way the world got populated and so on, gets an Afrocentric to ask him a question, and he goes, yeah, I don't even understand what you've said to me for the last hour and a half. But at the end of it, he opened it up for questions, and the guy asked, so when did somebody who looked like Liz Taylor ever end up in Africa? And he actually said, like 60, 70,000 years. I mean, before they ever made it out of Africa, they're already modern and everything. And then the guy said something else, and he goes, no, actually, always. Well, if you look at the representations of Cleopatra, she had a big nose and so on like that. And that really, if you look at her today, I don't know what number you would try to give her if somebody wanted to try to do something like that. But it's not necessarily the epitome of what we look at as being most beautiful in a modern days. But then a lot of her charm was in the fact that she had wily ways, was sexually active really here with these Caesar, which she had Caesarion by, and then Mark Antony, and so on. So she was really quite the prize in that way. And you could look at some star and say, well, there's this one, she's probably a 7 or whatever, but then her personality and da da da. Well, if you knew she was the whole Queen of Egypt too, oh yeah, that's got to add to the prize, sadly. But so anyhow, Afrocentrics in their myth here that they have, Cleopatra is viewed as a big trophy. We talk about Jesus and so on, but you might think that the real Cleopatra maybe didn't look like Elizabeth Taylor and in fact was black. This is what Afrocentrics claim. They're wrong. Perhaps Cleopatra VII did not look like Liz Taylor. Cleopatra's charms apparently do not rely so much on beauty, and her nose that she has in all of the art famously did not help, but she was certainly not black in any way, shape, or form. But due to the cargo cult mentality and the way that we're in the age of pandering, they actually feel like this might be okay to try to put it out and then turn around and call it a documentary. Well, in my eyes, it's not really cool to put it out no matter what. One would be totally self-exposing, and the other one would be outright trying to lie to black people to get them to believe something that everyone on earth knows is not true. And that would be a sad way to try to live. I often think it must be sad to sit around and have all these beliefs and you can't go with what really happened because that's too embarrassing. So you're going to embarrass yourself for generation after generation trying to lie desperately when everybody else knows the truth. And they're like, please stop. It looks so terrible, disgusting. You can't stop, can you? No, you can't. Some people just don't want to get out of the cargo cult thing. Well, how long do you think it would take at the level they were to turn around and be out of that? And the answer is, I'm guessing way more than 4 or 5 generations. Cleopatra descended from the Ptolemaic Greek dynasty. Those rulers lived isolated from the local Egyptian population and went to great lengths as to preserve their bloodlines. Much has been made of the name Egyptians used for their country, Kemet. Blacks almost seem like they have a special word if they think they know something, and of course they learned that from Caucasians who deciphered the hieroglyphs and figured it all out. The name indeed means black. As the cases of niggardly and blackmail prove, overzealous anti-racists are eager to racialize words somehow that have nothing to do with race and really nothing to do with what they're talking about, but they just show that they're very frail. Or at the same time, they try to push up and bruff up and act tough and everything, and they can't even sound words. One of the things you're taught as a kid is basically sticks and stones will never hurt me, but yet blacks don't get to hear that. Apparently before that, their mama's already telling them, I don't care what they tell you, Cleopatra was black. In fact, I'm saying we when I'm pointing at other people we didn't know existed and are never related to in the first place. So that's real self-exposing. Whenever you turn around and look back at it and you go, so who were those West Africans? Oh my gosh, what is this show versus what they try to lie about? Wow, the contrast there. But they keep saying we and pointing at other people. So they keep trying to racialize words, even concepts like science, math, water, everything, to claim that Kemet is proof that ancient Egyptians were black. But historians send ample proof that the blackness of Kemet refers to the color of the fertile ground or soil, not the skin of the color of Egyptians. In fact, if you look at the monogram here, it says black lands. You know what's crazy about that? Hate to have to mention this because, in an age of pandering and white guilt, but a town that I grew up in Greenville, Texas, right downtown on the railroad tracks, it used to have a huge sign that was eventually lit up, and it was the slogan for the town for a while, and it said, Greenville, the blackest land and the whitest people. Oh, can you imagine that in a modern day trying to be put up anywhere? But what they're referring to is that the rich alluvial soil they have around there is black. Around Greenville is incredible soil. There's a lot of farm work that's done around there, and it's real important. They used to have the largest flour mill in the world with Robin Hood flour, if you remember the brand. And they had the world's largest cotton gin at one time too there. And if you ever look at a plowed up land around that area, not just Greenville, but surrounding it quite a bit, it is all a rich, deep, dark black soil that's really nutrient rich and incredible. But it's, of course, was taken down before the 1960s and so on like that, but it lasted for quite some time there. And again, we're talking about soil and white people, but black people are like, oh my God, you said the whitest people, but there are black people around and you're not including us. And here we go. But this idea of chemet, which they think has to do with something, well, the black arts used to be chemistry, and that's where that word comes from, and it doesn't come from black people whatsoever either. But they want to claim this because if they feel like they can claim it, they feel like they can claim the whole heralds of civilization. But then again, we already have that figured out a long time ago, and Sumer predates Egypt, by the way. They heard about that, by the way, and they tried to claim them too. In fact, they're willing to try to claim anybody else except for themselves, and they don't feel it looks foolish whenever they say we was Shakespeare, we were the Moors, we were the Greeks. Oh yeah, they've tried all of these things here. It's amazingly sad to watch from a third person's point of view, but Mountain Bernal was a professor at neither James nor Diop were respectable scholars, by the way, right here in the middle of the page. I could go deep into that. Let's not. Let's just leave it at that, because that's a nice statement if you go look into it. But Martin Bernal was a professor at Cornell University, and he wrote a series of books seemingly supporting Afrocentric claims. In more academic language, though, and without the conspiracy-mongering tone of James' claims about outright theft. So Bernal argues that the Greek civilization derived from Egypt. He relied extensively on etymologies that most historians all have debunked, by the way. But there are loan words and connectives. And the idea that Athena and Neith have something to do with each other than just something that's corresponding. But of course, this shows you Caucasians altogether and has nothing to do with black people. But the title of his most famous book was Black Athena. Athena is important in Bernal's argument because, according to him, Athena was originally Egyptian goddess Neith. This claim has also been debunked by historians. And there may be superficial resemblances in both goddesses, but not to the extent to warrant the claim that Athena was originally Egyptian. Well, in my work, I've actually shown you that the Greek gods weren't just the gods of this one little place, Olympus, but it encompassed all the major gods of all these other people, and they swirled together, making their idea. But a lot of people, when they grow up, including myself, may end up start out with Greek mythology. And so you have that there, but whenever you have that little base that goes on, and then they tell you before that time, the Sumer had these people, and this is what's said about them, and you're like, huh? Oh yeah, there's a flood myth from them too, and so on and everything, and it all goes together too. And a lot of it has connections to the Younger Dryas event, not just the localized flood that happened in Sumer. But let's go back and get into this. Athena was originally goddess Neith. This claim has been debunked by historians, and there may be superficial resemblances to both goddesses, not to the extent to warrant the claim that Athena was originally Egyptian, but there are connections with this, just as much as there are connections with Caucasians, and a common belief, if you look at their mythologies and variations on a theme. Bernal seemed, including the Bible, by the way. Furthermore, Bernal seemed to care little about the race of ancient Egyptians, but the fact that he used black in the title was surely a clever ploy to pander to Afrocentrics who are eager to say that everything in Greek culture was originally black. See, this is that cargo cult idea where you stole something from my ancestors, and then you look at it and you go, that's none of your ancestors. Can you imagine those people on those islands trying to explain to them that no, Caucasians made all of this, and your ancestors were actually less advanced even than you? You're more advanced now from having ever dealt with Caucasians coming through in World War II. But they're still staring at the sky and building all these models that look like planes and stuff, and it's really kind of sad to watch. And then you can hear what they even themselves say about it and how it came to be. It's crazy. But Black Athena, as if Athena was black in any way. So here we go again. Today there is much discussion about what cultural appropriation even means. Perhaps white college students should not be wearing sombreros in Halloween parties. Perhaps Elvis was wrong to dance like African Americans did. Those difficult calls. Well, if you believe it or not, a kid in braces named Forrest Gump taught Elvis how to dance like that, and they actually akin it towards retarded people, but never mind. These are difficult calls, and then the conversation could be open. But however, if activists wanted any credibility, they should begin by denouncing Afrocentrism as the ultimate case of cultural appropriation. I've seen blacks try to cultural appropriate, something like braids or whatever in your hair, and of course that's been totally debunked before, but they don't realize why they're trying to say that. Are you wearing tennis shoes and socks and Caucasian clothes, your glasses that you got on? You even got a Caucasian mimicking hair hat on. You're worshiping their God and doing all these other things, and you have the nerve to try to come on and claim something that has nothing to do with your people. Hey, look up old slave drawings before photography or anything, of course, way back in the day, and you'll never find one with actual Rastafarian type hairdo or having dreads whatsoever. And then they try to claim it, and it's like, you're not related to those people that had it. You didn't even know it existed, but here you go. Again, you say we, and you point at other people. It's crazy. But they think that's normal. So having to fight through that wall of, oh my gosh, is pretty tough. So anyhow, Afrocentrics prey on modern Egyptians by claiming that all the wonderful things that are found in their country were actually built by black people. And in fact, they're claiming West Sub-Saharans knew Egypt existed, which is actually the farthest from the truth. But they've actually tried to claim that they were the earliest Japanese, that they were this, they were that. It's gotten crazy, but they seem to think that that's okay, and they hope that if they put all that out, that maybe you'll at least agree that the Egyptians were West Sub-Saharans, and it's like, no. They were always Caucasians, a lot of them with blue eyes and blonde and red hair, and here's the proof of that. Where's your proof West Sub-Saharans even knew Egypt existed? And they get real mad and then try to deflect and say something else and bring up another lie. So maybe you'll forget about that one just then. And here we go, and it keeps going and going, people. It's one of the most difficult things to watch, but they seem to want to have this idea. So in other words, Afrocentrics want black people to culturally appropriate which belongs to the Egyptians and Caucasians, just like their God and so on, and dismissing them as descendants of invaders who had nothing to do with pharaonic achievements. Now, in this case, who are the real culture vultures? In the case for Afrocentrism's collapse under any scrutiny, but predictably in the absence of empirical support, Afrocentrics need to play the race card to stay in business. You see, if any of these conversations get anywhere, you spout some reality or point out something that's against their lie, then they try to claim that that's racist, that you can't critique black people whatsoever. I can't hear that, and I'm going to use a special word now, abracadabra, racist. And it's like, that means nothing anymore. You keep crying wolf as you're being propped up and be giving the most propping anybody's ever been given in the history of humanity, and then you're still trying to claim this crap. It's disgusting, and a lot of people have realized that if you try to cater to it, it's not going to end in any way. It never will. And then they'll try to strut around and act like they did something, and it's just disgusting to sit and watch something like this go on. So, Afrocentrics need to play the race card just to stay in business, so any debunker of these absurd claims will be labeled as a racist, as Afrocentrics see it. To reject their dubious thesis or lies amounts to oppressing black people somehow. Oh yeah, so if you want to understand where you look where they're being propped up the more than anybody ever in history, yet they still claim to play the victim and say that they're oppressed. It's if you don't believe that we were the smart people that taught you, then you're oppressing us. And it's like, well, that's never going to go in effect. So you might want to quit thinking the lie that you're oppressed somehow. If you look at your real history, it has nothing to do with Egypt whatsoever or anything else that you're claiming. Please stop. It's too self-exposing, and it's past, oh, that's funny. It will be a joke for generations, but you can imagine that should be what's accepted because of the way you've touted it, and especially in the face of people going, nope, this is reality, and then you come up and keep spouting these things off and so on. It's gotten disgusting, but I guess I've said that far too many times. But they're oppressed. So this is a sad case of most notorious critic of Afrosystem, Mary Lefkowitz. In her book, she patiently deconstructs the claims of Afrocentrism. In Lefkowitz's books, there's not one single sentence that could be read as racist, although she does describe what the Egyptians were truly like, with very compelling evidence. Yet, as far as Afrocentrists are concerned, she is an evil, racist woman. In fact, I once conducted a discussion with Lefkowitz on YouTube, this guy did, and I was shocked by the number of hateful comments that viewers left against her. It gets to the point where they're going to troll it. Oh, they heard that she was up. Well, before she even gets going, I'm going to try to debunk her or discredit her or personal attack whenever she's going, well, it's not me. I mean, all of archaeology and everything else says this. And they're like, well, I don't have any logic, so I'm going to say that if I make her look bad, then that'll make the reality of what she says go away. And it's like, well, that's not the way that it works at all, but you do you, but that's too self-exposing. You ought to quit. You might think that with all this debunking done by both white or Yaakov Yeshavet and Ronald Fritz and black people like Gerald Early or Henry Louis Gates, these scholars, the one in the picture that started this whole thing, Afrocentrism would just be somehow a relic of the past and an old joke. Yet this is not so. All in the name of decolonizing the curriculum, students at many schools are still actually taught that Aristotle was a thief and that Cleopatra looked black. But of course, Aristotle was before the thing that you're even trying to claim that happened, that he thieved. And then, of course, Cleopatra is a Macedonian Greek woman with auburn hair. And what the hell are you trying to do? Yeah, the lure of turning the tables against racism and simply inverting the Hamitic theory by now claiming that everything great among the Greeks and Egyptians was built by blacks who did not know that the world or Egypt whatsoever existed, just like the headhunters of Irian Jaya, they're not related to either, by the way, but you could think of somebody that's segregated in this one part here and is different. I made the comment recently that perhaps we left them alone, all these primitives that are still left in the world, because what we saw with blacks and the mistakes. But there's another way of, did we also leave some of this around so we can turn around and they go, oh, we were primitives, and they go, look, there still goes on. We've got video of it and everything. So what are you talking about? It's in the non-colonized spot, so that's real telling too. I've had them get on my videos and go, we've got this now, we've got that now. So you have white things there. Oh, they get mad. They get mad because it goes against their lie. Well, you're the one that came on strutting trying to talk crap about something that was debunked before you ever got here. Why do you want to do something like this? So this is all too powerful to go against. You just might as well just let it go. no one's willing to do it because there's a special word called racist. And if you go out against black people and say, you know, y'all believe this and it's a lie, oh my gosh. Then they want to try to deflect and say all kinds of, it's just a nightmare what you go in. Or you'll have things like whenever I went on Chief X's channel and tried to talk to this guy that was spouting all kinds of lies that even Chief X debunked in front of you there. And whenever I showed up and said a word, he thought he would just yell and talk over me and tell me that he's a god because he's got a Caucasian microphone that's badass now and this, that, and the other. He's a god that he can just talk over me and I won't ever get to say a word, so he won't get to hear anything. Oh, it takes a while, and he keeps trying to high side it on me and everything else, which is real disgusting. I kind of more or less let it go on and just grabbed my laundry and some other things while he was yapping there for 10 minutes straight about how he was a god, not going to let me talk because he's just going to talk over me because he's just going to never shut up. So see, and then as soon as I said, well, then he just started doing it again for a couple of minutes. It's hilarious. I've got the whole thing recorded. Of course, Chief X does too. Even talk to him about it, and he goes, oh man, that was terrible. But he doesn't want to say that because that guy's always pimping out Chief X, so he seems it's okay. And then even now, some of my comments might be construed as racist. And I go, you can tell me whenever the reality is really racist, and Well, he doesn't like certain things I said, but when have I misspoke or said something that's not true? And he, of course, doesn't have an answer for that. But so I even got blocked from his channel and then back on, then blocked again, then back on. Oh, it's a crazy little thing here. Whenever he had an idea that not too long ago that him and I would get together and that if anybody wanted to challenge, he would even pay for it or do whatever because I talked to him just for a couple of times on the phone and he realized that I had the snap of everything. And they go, here, you want to debunk a white boy? Here's a guy. And nobody was willing to take up on it, just like he tried to say, name me a black tribe that's ever been out of sub-Saharan Africa, and I'll give you $100. And nobody even took him up on the idea because they know it's a fail. Yet they've got this whole, we were the Vikings. But that's been happening for a while now. They showed Hannibal Barka, and then of course you look at the statues and you go, that dude's not black, but yet they tried to make him black. Idris Elba was in this and stuff, and so it's disgusting how they get people to do this, but you can take a not well-known actress or actor and they really want to desperately be in something important or get their name out there and so on, but doing it in this way would probably be totally the wrong way to do it, but yet they don't care. Nowadays, bad publicity is a whole lot better than no publicity. So if I could just, like Miley Cyrus, do something just outlandish, I'll get my name out there. And it's like, well, from what you came from, you probably shouldn't be doing that. And Disney kid and stuff. But then again, look at what Disney's trying to do to themselves nowadays. And it's a crazy, mad world. But so for all these reasons, this guy says he's not optimistic that the damage done by Nicole Hannah-Jones can be fully contained. Even if the New York Times retract its coverage, which they've done, readers have already been fed the narrative that the American Revolution was all about slavery somehow. Oh yeah, did you know there's Hamilton out, and what they basically do is they just race swap everybody and have a bunch of gay black people singing songs about how they ran a country or something too, and oh, no telling what's going to come from that. So it's the age of pandering. But so even if the New York Times retracts that coverage out there and the lie about slavery or whatever, you're still going to hear it soon. And of course, the Civil War is all about that too, and wasn't about Caucasian people trying to get together rather than separating themselves. And setting the slaves free was just some way to ruin the other side so they could get control of it. Used like a pawn. Yet this guy still takes comfort in speculating that had scholars not engaged in debunking Afrocentrism, its lure would have been even greater. So even though the damage has been done, scholars need to engage Hannah-Jones and debunk her dubious claims for the integrity of the historical truth. And in fact, every single lie needs to be debunked out of this, just so the world, which includes them, can end up going back to normal, to end up not turning around and trying to do the 1984 type of crap, or live some kind of lie, and then your lie is all based on trying to claim other people's things, like a cargo cult, which you probably ought to go right now and take a look at my video on cargo cults, and you'll be like, it takes a minute to get into it, to get into show what they all say. By the end of it, you're like, oh yeah, I can see that. Oh wow. Oh wow. So I don't know where we're at here. We're at over an hour now. My gosh. So let's just take a look here, if we can, at a few things and try to get over it, I guess. Let's look at the cargo cult phenomenon.
Cargo cult is a name given to several religions which arose by tribal societies that came into contact with Western civilizations. These religions started when the technologically primitive hunter-gatherers saw Western manufactured goods for the first time, such as radios, clothing, and metals offloaded from planes. And
so this is no different than black people being at the fence of South Africa for so long, and then finally they let down the fence, or Nubians trying to get into Egypt, or so on. I guess the weird difference is that black people never really had to stay at a fence in America. They were there, so it's something quite different. But let's take a look at the portion here where they talk about Egypt and how that cargo cult concept can be applied, if you watch the whole video there about it, to the idea that they used to be the Egyptians somehow, and how it's affecting them and the rest of the world a little bit, just from the fact of somebody being a liar.
Turns up as a phenomena in modern Western woke culture, which is in denial about the reality of how agricultural civilization was diffused around the world during the Holocene, and instead makes up a fake alternative history which is exploited to push a political agenda. For example, Netflix this week announced that it will be depicting Cleopatra as sub-Saharan African, when she's obviously white, of Macedonian descent, as were all of the Ptolemy rulers who lived in Egypt. Ptolemy was a general of Alexander the Great, who became ruler of Egypt around 300 BC, and his dynasty lasted until Cleopatra's demise and the start of the Roman period, around 30
AD. So we have connections with the Bible and things like that to go on with this concept, but this is the way Cleopatra's always been shown. And so it's weird whenever you see the attempt by the people who end up making this new documentary on Cleopatra, and trying to indicate, well, my grandma told me something and she was a cargo cult racist, so I'm going to believe that. And even though everything that the world knows shows that this isn't true at all, we're going to go ahead and put it out here. And then worst of all, I guess, is people, you'd have to realize, Jada Pinkett Smith and how she's been so racist about the whole thing, and what she's done to Will Smith here recently and everything else, and then to turn around and go, well, I'm going to try to come out of it smelling like roses. Look at me, cargo cult, and lie about Cleopatra herself. I'm not even trying for the Egyptians. I'm trying for these other people that ended up coming after, and we want to go Greek now. We're just past that point. It's like, no, you never got even into anything whatsoever. It's funny, they think that we conquered it all, we told them, and it's like, no, you're embarrassing yourself. Please stop. But you have that effect. But, the Greeks, were they the white people that showed up? Well, let's look at that, because even, Chief X and other people have turned around and said, oh, they weren't, just like in the article here before, well, they weren't black, but they weren't white, or whatever. Let's look at how that plays out here, and we'll look at real mummies and so on.
AD. That said, the further one goes back into antiquity, the more fair, meaning more blonde and ginger, the ruling elite becomes.
We'll get the example from him. It's going to be the same thing that was in my cargo cult video, because this is the same one. it's feeding off of. But you can see all these people with Caucasian hair, and then a lot of them are red-headed and blondes and so on too. And I guess we ought to quit now and go to looking at blue-eyed Egyptians and the earliest dynasties and things like that that I've shown so many times in my other videos. It's almost not worth doing, but then again, if any of this has any worth of doing whatsoever to black people to help him out and quit lying, so we can get on with our life and they quit being so much of a burden and a racist that really hates everybody that's trying to prop them up, maybe we could go with something else. Oh, did you know that they try to claim the Natufians now because they know they had something to do with the people that ended up becoming Egypt? So they try to claim that these people and their phenotype somehow were West African primitives. Oh yeah, we was the Natufians. And not ourselves. Not ourselves. Funny thing is, they've got stone circles all the way down to the Cape of Africa that match the ones in the Black Desert across the Levant area. And oh, now all of a sudden they don't want to talk about that whatsoever. So that's gotten pretty bad, I guess. But so what I'm going to do here is something that you can do yourself. I'm at DuckDuckGo, by the way, instead of trying to rely on Google, because if you look through back and forth, you'll see, this one has kind of got an agenda thrown off in there that DuckDuckGo doesn't allow, do they? So let's simply type in blue-eyed Egyptians. And you would think that what you would be seeing here now is a modern form, but it's so important and that's such a phenomenon, they want to show you right off the bat here. And what you're looking at is these crystal blue-eyed statues of the earliest dynasties. Now, they've also said that somebody near the Black Sea was 10,000 BC, all related, and blue-eyed people all related, and so on like that. But they've also shown that Cheddarman and all the other people that supposedly people are led to think didn't have any blue eyes whatsoever, that every single one they've checked of those had blue eyes, but it's just not SLC 225 or what it is. It's a different one than the Nordic one that you're looking at. But it's funny that Nordic one shows up in Egypt. And whenever I was talking to Chief X about it, I said, look at all these blue-eyed people. Look at the reserve heads. So here's Nefertiti, right, by the way. And so if we look at this too, of course, King Tut, here's the way King Tut looked. Of course, King Tut was R1B, so it's questionable whether he had a brownish green eye like that, because Tut's relatives are blue-eyed Egyptians. That's what it says right over here. King Tut's relatives and blue-eyed Egyptians, famous historical figures, blue-eyed people. It's not mine, it's somebody else. But then we can look at this. This is even not what we're looking at here with all these blue-eyed statues here, by the way, are on the 4th dynasty and the pyramid builders. But here's even from the Naqada culture and blue-eyed statues from way back in pre-dynastic Egypt. In fact, we can look up Ginger, the blonde-haired pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy, and Okay, well, where are all the black people? There aren't any. And any of the ones that you would try to claim as we aren't related to you whatsoever, and you didn't know they existed, please stop. So we have that idea of blue-eyed Egyptians there, and these crystal blue eyes that you can see, and there are many, 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 many variations of showing this happening here. And so they try to act like, oh, well, black people were all there and then white people took over, and it's like from the pre-dynastic it was always Caucasian people. And by the way, no matter if you're pointing at other people you didn't know existed saying you didn't know Egypt existed, please stop. Everyone knows you didn't know Egypt existed, so when you try to claim we, it's kind of sad. I asked Chief X once about recently about, okay, so what's the current claim, because it keeps flipping. You hear a lot of them say we, but then other ones indicate that it's not them. They'll even possibly mention they're West Sub-Saharans like Chief X is, and wants everybody else to embrace rather than a lie. But they say some black people somewhere did it, and then they're still trying to indicate that somehow black people were the ancient Egyptians, and everything in all of archaeology, history whatsoever, shows up to be no. In fact, the current population of Egypt doesn't like this. because there are some statements in there that they actually didn't, they're not really related so much to the ancient Egyptians. Let's go back to that separate video and I'll show you that in reality.
Did you know that there's an endless supply of free electricity constantly flowing in the ground beneath you? Did you know that there's an easy way to harness that free electricity?
Oh my.
Cargo cult is a name given to several
So as you go back and you think, okay, well, Cleopatra was Macedonian, but she was white. But then all before that, they were black. And it's like, no, they weren't at all the way through. Here we are talking about Queen Ty, Ramses, everything. She's got auburn hair. Oh, that happened because of Natron. No, it didn't. Oh, here's a giant cemetery out here Brigham Young has been doing for over 20 years. Millions of mummies. They're separated by hair color. The Natron process doesn't do anything whatsoever to any change of hair color, and it sure wouldn't turn it into Caucasian here, but somehow they can't hear any of this. They're just stuck in a lie.
The great royal wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, mother of Pharaoh Akhenaten, and grandmother of King Tut, was also a redhead, as can clearly be seen here using a CT scan. DNA results of Takubuti, the famous 2,600-year-old ancient Egyptian mummy on display at the Ulster Museum, shows that her DNA is more genetically similar to Europeans than modern Egyptian populations. The DNA...
In fact, DNA papers came out not too long ago, and really the Egyptians didn't like it so much. But then again, you've got to go with truth and reality. See how that works? And so they tell you that the Egyptian mummies have a European and Turkish DNA. But in the paper they mention they're not talking about Turkish people. They're talking about the ancient people that lived in Anatolia, who used to be a whole lot more like blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and so on than you would see in the demographic today, i.e., you see what we're talking about. And then they came out and said that more than half of Western Europe has the same DNA of R1b, modification 269, is it, or whatever, and that they're related directly to King Tut somehow, and so on. Of course, this is while blacks are trying to claim we was Tut, we was this, we was that, and you get destroyed in every way. And then you turn around and you make out this new movie where we was Cleopatra, we was the Greeks, we was, and it's hilariously sad, let's just say. But is this the only paper? No. Let's look again.
Results are published in Nature Communications. Scientists obtained DNA from 90 individual mummies.
So, and in all of that, it was all Caucasian mummies. But then again, they say that their ancient Egyptians are more closely related to who? Europeans than modern Egyptian scientists claim. So when you say they weren't white, but they weren't black, and you go, well, DNA says, no, they were Caucasians, they were white. The demographic you're looking at wasn't in effect so much anymore. In fact, Johannes Krauss's personal paper he wrote on it is that the current population has a 1% match with the ancient Egyptians. And then he goes into the middle of the paper and says, well, probably the main reason that it shows up this way and legally comes out mathematically to be a 1% connection is that post-Roman times, some sub-Saharan DNA showed up, and that's what's twisted the current population. And the closest ones to the ancient ones are actually the Coptics that are still there, who are the Christian Egyptians and so on, if you will, later times here. But it says this straight out: ancient Egyptians are more closely related to Europeans than even modern Egyptians. And they didn't include in that anything about the Nubians that might be hanging around or anything there. That's a given. Oh, they throw one in there and they go, oh, farthest away from, in fact, the reason that they're not related anymore. It's strange. It's exactly opposite. It's hilariously sad. It's the reality of it is exactly the opposite of what blacks try to say whenever they say we were. It's terrible. So these cargo cult ideas and the other ones show that they're waiting for this guy named John Frum. but everybody realized that's John from Indiana or John from this, John from that met them in this cargo cult thing that's going on. Or the other one is John Navy. And they're like, oh yeah, so the people with the Navy ships that showed up, the cargo. So what's going on here? What's a cargo cult on that? But they claim in the movies there that it was their ancestors that did it, and the white people owe them a bunch, and they're sitting around staring at the sky all day long, hoping a cargo plane will show up. They made a fake model of it, and now they're pretending that it's all going to show up. Well, that's the way it would be in effect if they were out behind a fence or stuck on an island. But when you're sitting there right in front of the Caucasians itself, it'd almost be a moot point, you'd think, but yet we still have this exact same type of mentality going on to this day. And it shows up readily, and nobody's correcting them. And one wonders why until you realize that, well, they're just self-exposing, and I mean, let them act silly. Well, they just spent millions of dollars making a movie that they want to get somebody to try to believe Cleopatra was black now. Oh, wow. Yeah, it just adds to it, doesn't it? Anyhow, guys, that was that article here on it, and we're going to go on to a different one here. I might do a separate total video on the fact of Cleopatra and who she was versus what black people say and so on, but with me just flaring on it a couple of times in this video and that other one, I don't think we really have to worry about that too much, but yet I'm guessing the way I'm going to look at it is if I hear one more thing, I'm just going to go ahead and make a video. Sick of it. Peace.